All right, and you're going to log in to Canvas. Everyone listening, and right under today's module, you'll see this. It's not an assignment, it's just a page. It's just a place for me to put the links. So find that page. And two, is this one of the brown ones? Do you see it like the sky? So you're just finding this page here. It's on the module. Oops. Look at all this stuff we've done. Okay, it's on the module. It looks like this: Deseret News versus Salt Lake Tribune. All right, I got to teach from back here, so listen up. So we are going to be talking about source credibility today and how to spot bias in sources and how to, if we find bias, like what to do with it. So we're going to be looking at the Salt Lake Tribune and the Deseret News. So let's look at the Salt Lake Tribune just as the on the front page first. All right, so we've got Salt Lake School District is not going to close a school this year, which is good news, I think. We've got a $1 billion transportation infrastructure bill could change Utah's roads and public transportation. We have, stay focused. We have this point about an inmate dying, the 3rd in February. We have an injury-plagued season. BYU coach Kalani Sitake, is that how I pronounce it? Yeah. Okay. When I know nothing, sorry, about sports. When looking for answers, so it's kind of like focusing on like the bad part of BYU. Yes, you need the round one. We have Utah bill would kill local laws prohibiting exotic animal circus acts and puppy mills, which is disturbing. A puppy mill is like they're breeders, but like in bad situations. They breed dogs like way too much. We've got ban on vaccine passports advances following rowdy hearing. And then notice here how they address religion. They've got a segment called Mormon Land, and it says hear from Latter-day Saints in Ukraine as they face bombs and bullets amid faith and fellowship. And we're going to be looking at this article a little more carefully. Huh? Ukraine is Mormon Land or Utah? It's like it's a section of the Salt Lake Tribune that they call Mormon Land. Oh, really? Yeah, yeah. Yes, a good point. Okay, yeah. So then, yeah, good point. Let's compare this to Deseret News. So these are both Utah papers, right? They're both like going to be reporting on relatively the same things. One thing I found kind of surprising is we start with climate change with Deseret News. More voters care about gas prices than climate change. Is there a balance? And I've been seeing a lot of climate change news in the Deseret News lately. 3 takeaways from President Biden's State of the Union. I'm not really sure what that means. How to fix a broken world according to this rabbi. They have a section that is called faith. Salt Lake Tribune has a religion section too. They just have a piece that's like the Mormon Land piece. I thought this was interesting that the comparison between the way they were reporting on BYU. Up next for Chippy, BYU could be a chance to avenge Pacific loss in WCC tournament. We've got the vaccine passport. Utah bill to ban vaccine passports giving committee okay after tense meeting. I want to take another look at the vaccine passport one here. Ban on vaccine passport advances following rowdy hearing. So intense versus rowdy is interesting. An example of vaccines losing effectiveness. Nothing about the infrastructure thing or the puppy mills thing.
T-Rex. Yeah, we can read that.
Where's the T?
Go back up. Yeah.
Cool. Read it on your own time. And then there was one thing about Ukraine that I wanted to look at. Hey, let's look and see who it is.
Senior.
We might know people this time.
I fill this up with water really fast.
Yeah.
I'll sprint.
We're Wasatch region, right?
That makes more sense.
Do we know any of these people?
No.
Oh, thanks.
What'd you say about
All right, well, I'll look at that later. Sorry. Sorry, there is just one that I want to look at that was about the Ukraine and the LDS Church, and it is not here anymore since yesterday on the front page. God bless the Ukrainian people. That's kind of it, but oh well, okay. There used to be one that was a slightly more respectful kind of like language choice for that. So what I want you to do is we're going to divide this class in half. And half of you are going to read the article from the Salt Lake Tribune about what Utahns thought of the State of the Union. It's Utah Congress people. And then the other half is going to read the exact same article, but from the Deseret News. And we want to see with something as like pretty straightforward as this, if we can still spot any evidence of bias. Even with like all these articles are going to be your quotes from people. Like it is just reporting on what Utah Congress people said, right? It's very quote heavy, these articles. So they're not opinion pieces, they're just supposed to be direct. And yet there are slight differences in how they talk about the different congressmen and how they present the information. So let's make sure we're even. 1, 2, 3, 4. This is 13, 0, 5. 5, that's 9, 10, 11. 12, 13. So from Eli and Gavin on over, why don't you guys do Deseret News? And then from Jack, Dash, and Matt on over, you guys do Salt Lake Tribune. Okay, and we'll get together and we'll compare the biases. Okay. So everyone's found that article. So just to be clear, you're only reading that article. I mean, you can read around when you're done, but you're only reading that article that I linked to on the Canvas page. So it's not just choose your own article, it's that one article. I'm gonna give you 5 minutes to read it.
I don't have it. Oh.
All right, Deseret.
That's not bad.
That's the one.
Where's Salt Lake Tribune?
Yeah. Shh, let's be quiet in here while people read. Will you raise your hand if you're done reading your article? Okay, a couple more minutes. If you're done, just look around the website, see if you can see anything else that seems interesting in terms of bias. Okay, now who's done reading their article? Raise your hand if you're done reading your article. Okay, good enough. So I am going to have those of you who read the Salt Lake Tribune go find a partner with somebody who read the Deseret News, and then find a place to sit so that you're next to each other. Take your Chromebook with you. For this one, you're just going to have to compare them on your own because you have a partner. Okay, 15 more seconds to find a partner, and then I will partner you. Okay, who's someone that read the Deseret News? Oh, who does not have a partner? Raise your hand if you don't have a partner. Gavin, do you have a partner? All right, Gavin and Rachel, you guys are going to be partners. Raise your hand if you don't have a partner. I know there's more. Okay, wait, it should be even. Raise your hand if you don't have a partner. And Dash doesn't have a partner. You guys both read Deseret News though, right? Okay, perfect. Ashlyn and Dash are going to be partners, and Keisha and Jack are going to be partners. Okay, to start, I want you to have a 2-minute discussion of any bias that you are seeing in the two articles. Shh. Listen, the only way you're going to be able to do that is to kind of look carefully side by side at the articles and see if you're seeing that there's different ways they're talking about different congressmen. Okay, discuss. That's it. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. All right, let's talk together for a second before we get specific. So, talk together for a minute. Okay, let's talk about what are some ways that you are identifying the bias. So I think number one, I'm going to put up here, which is word choice. There's one in there that's super interesting where one article will use said and the other article used accused. And I think those two words have very different tone to them, right? One seems like somebody is being really harsh and the other one just sounds like somebody is being sort of straightforward. So it can be individual word choice to us to identify bias. What are some other things that you're seeing in the articles, not specific, but general, that we could use to identify that kind of bias? Yeah.
Almost like point of view.
Okay, good.
Choosing what to say and what not to say.
Yeah.
Or like what information to give out. And what.
Yeah, we talk about this with documentary filmmaking all of the time. It's like, it seems like a documentary filmmaking should be totally straightforward. They are just filming what is there, right? But in terms of editing and in terms of like where you're pointing the camera, that changes the message quite a lot, so that you can cut out certain information, you can shape it the way you want it to be. Yeah.
I think like the tone is different. I was just looking at some of the word choice, like it was spurring applause, chanting USA from the House floor. It just feels a lot maybe exaggerated and really theatrical.
Okay, good.
That's what I'm looking for.
So we're kind of looking for these words that are a little bit emotional then, even slightly emotional. I liked your words though, theatrical, like dramatic, to add some color. And really when we're reading something, like we want to get those kind of words because it's like more interesting to read, but depending on the choice of words really changes the tone of it. Yeah, Jaden?
The article was pretty focused on saying it wasn't like jumping from trying to connect all these ideas into one. It was just very informative.
So the way that they choose to aim that focus, I think also gives us a sense of the bias. Yeah.
So kind of like what you said was, I think what it ends with is what you're going to remember. So depending on what it ends with is what they're trying to get you to like think about.
So much order of ideas, not just what it ends with, but also what they put in the beginning. And then if we remember the end better, what have they stuck in the middle so that we don't remember it as well? You know, Jack?
I think the quotes they use.
Yeah.
Like this always produces a lot of like negative quotes towards Biden, I feel like. And I kind of like shows like there's like all the quotes they're using are like negative towards Biden. Give you like
super interesting way that they choose to quote versus not choosing to quote too. Sometimes it will be the words that the Utah representative said. And we know that because we see the Deseret News or one of them will quote them. And then we'll see in the other one that they're using that same phrase, but it's no longer in quotes. So it's like, are they attributing that to somebody, or are they, when they don't put it into quotes, are they kind of just saying like facts, you know? Or are they sort of saying, oh, and this is our point of view as well? That can be a tricky little thing. Okay, so what I'm going to have you do now, there are three, I can't remember his first name. Is it Roger? Robert? Yeah, one of the, Blake. Way off. Blake and Mitt. I remember Mitt's name. Okay. The articles talk about lots of representatives, but these three I think are interesting in terms of the way that they're shaping their character in the article. So with your partner, again, I want you to find details for how the articles express bias about these three people and what they said. And once you discover something, you're going to come up here and you're going to put it either under Deseret News or Salt Lake Tribune. You're going to write the phrase or the little detail that you think helps us understand the bias. So just send one person up each time you come up with something to add to the board. So it should be totally full with ideas. Okay, any ideas or any questions? Okay, go ahead.
Sorry. My friend, his like battery died out of nowhere. I said this is not an excuse, but like we tried to fix it, so we like, wouldn't
His
start,
car
and then,
battery?
like, yeah, and then we had to.
All right, let's look at this together now. all the things people pointed out. So everyone's looking at the board, kind of taking it all in.
My handwriting's so good.
Okay. Here's one thing I've noticed about the hollow point, because someone said over here that they also say hollow, right? But what did you notice about the difference in the way that the two say hollow? Because they're both representing that same point of view. Look it up on your, do a Control F and find hollow and see how it changes. They're Control F on the Chromebooks?
Yeah.
Okay. What's different about the way that they say hollow? Yeah, Sophie.
One part is that they use quotes.
Yeah.
They didn't. They just kind of said it in their own way.
Totally. Yeah. Okay, good. Tell me a lot about the Mitt Romney stuff right here. It says like comments are more positive and include constructive criticism. Who wrote that one? Nobody's owning up to writing this one. It's such a good point. Did you guys write it?
No.
Little
I don't know what
gigglers.
they're laughing about.
We wrote Unity and Tragedy.
Which one did you write? Unity and Tragedy. Oh, okay. Okay, I think this is a really good point. Did you notice how the Salt Lake Tribune ends with Romney? Right? They do, right? I'm making sure that. No, they end with Mike Lee.
Yeah.
Yes, they end with Mike Lee. That's right. Who ends with Romney? Just any of them? Oh no. I missed
Yeah,
it.
no, Desert News.
Deseret News ends with Romney,
Yeah.
right? Okay, and Salt Lake Tribune ends with Mike Lee. What do you think the difference is there? Why would they do that? Why do they? Because Dash said this is like they want us to end. This is what they want us to remember moving forward. Why does the Salt Lake Tribune want us to remember what Mike Lee said versus the Deseret News having us remember what Mitt Romney said?
So maybe the Salt Lake Tribune is more biased towards Biden because it ends with a quote talking about how Mike Lee thinks Biden is like senile.
Yeah.
And then meanwhile, the other one talks about how Mitt Romney actually appreciated the speech.
Yeah, okay, good. So here we have, if we're ending with like this idea that Mike Lee is really critical of Biden and kind of like all of them seem pretty straightforward and pretty like measured in what they are saying, but Mike Lee's losing it comment, which Eli is suspicious that that's how we should read it, but both papers read it that way. So ending with that losing it comment at the end, that kind of tells us that like they're being mean, all these representatives. Like it's almost like saying like, and look how mean Mike Lee is, the end, you know, so leaving us with that point of view. Whereas the way that they talk about Romney, is what we learn in education classes is called a compliment sandwich, which I think is so funny. They say something really nice that Romney, not really nice, but nice that Romney said about Biden, then something critical, and then back to something nice about Biden. So we're like meant to look at that and say, look, Romney likes the guy, you know? There's also a really interesting way in these articles that they transition between the different senators. In the Deseret News, you'll notice that their transitions are a lot stronger. Like they find commonalities between everything that the representatives are saying. So you'll see that Mike Lee says one thing about him, and then it transitions, I think, into Chris Stewart. I can't remember exactly, but it transitions into one of them, and it basically repeats what Mike Lee just said to be like, look, unity in the party in our sort of like criticism of Joe Biden, right? But when you look at the Salt Lake Tribune, they don't make that kind of effort to create those transitions. And what ends up happening is you go from the positives of Mitt Romney to a negative thing from a different Republican senator. So like a way of saying like, hey, look, there's actually disagreement with it and fracturing within the party. And it's tiny, right? We look at those differences. All these differences are really tiny. They're mostly quotes, but we can tell even from something as straightforward as this kind of where these papers lean. So what would you say on like a spectrum? Actually, I did this right. Okay, so the Deseret News over here kind of on the right, a little bit more conservative, right? The Salt Lake Tribune over here on the left, a little bit more liberal. Where should I put the Salt Lake Tribune in terms of that line? So let's say it's like this political line, and over here, oh, I don't know what's over here. Over here is like the Communist Manifesto. And over there is just like the furthest right thing. I don't know. Where's the Deseret News in terms of like the political spectrum, do you think? Tell me when to stop. Yeah. Okay. Tell me when to stop on Salt Lake Tribune. I agree. I think that they're like pretty like moderate in terms of how they are trying to present information, like in an unbiased way. But I just like, as a general question, do you think it's possible to present information in an unbiased way? No. Looking at these two articles, it kind of seems like not, right? Because in your very like smallest little word choices, you're going to reveal what your political perspective is or what your angle is when you're approaching a certain subject. So Salt Lake Tribune is kind of like that paper. It's got, you know, most of its readerships are in Salt Lake or Salt Lake County. There's most of its editorials are usually like a little bit more left-leaning, a little bit more liberal. Its cartoonist has often been accused of being like over here. And Deseret News is owned by the LDS Church, and so it tends to be a little bit more conservative in its value system, right? And I think we could look at any source, any news source, and we could make these same judgments. So then what do we do? If we are trying to decide what is credible news and what is truth, how do we determine that? That's a real question. Yeah, Sophie.
I think it's hard, but I think one thing that helps is reading same thing on different sources.
Yeah.
Because even when reading this, like when I read the Deseret one, there was stuff in here or stuff that wasn't in here that I read on the other one that I didn't realize. Like Mitt Romney, I didn't even like in Deseret News, it only said his critiques on it, and it didn't think he even agreed with it.
Okay.
And then even on this one, I think it was more where he said something good about it, and then looks like you have to read more to get at least most of the details.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so your comment about like how they can edit and leave things out, the more you read, the more information that you have, and you can kind of actually determine what exactly happened. Yeah, I remember though, I was I remember once I was going to just regular Virginia. I was going there for a concert. Just regular Virginia. I was going there for a concert and there was a hurricane brewing. Yeah, and we were in the middle of, I've never been in a hurricane. I'm not from this, I've never like been, you know, even near a hurricane. And we were watching the news because I was really hoping this concert didn't get canceled, and because we had traveled for it. And we're watching the news and there is just so much destruction shown on the news. Like all of these like houses destroyed and trees like toppled over and all of this stuff. But then when I looked out the window, there was like nothing going on. And I think like the sort of enormity of, or like the number of sources that were all reporting on like a few trees that got knocked over, but taking pictures from different angles made the problem seem so much bigger. So in some ways there was like this problem where I had too much information from too many sources, and that also gave me an inaccurate view of what the actual thing was. And then people made decisions based on those news sources, that news reporting. So the concert that I was going to got canceled, even though there really was not any, you know, terrible rain or wind or anything. It got canceled based on those news reports. So there's like real consequences to like how the news is reporting this stuff. So let's look at another article now. Go back to Canvas. And there is a assignment called Sources for March 2nd and 3rd. Okay, and you're going to click on the first one, US media polarization in the 2020 election, a nation divided. All right, this is a very long article. We're just going to read the first page, so I'm going to give you a couple minutes to read that first page. Is anyone lost with where we should be. So you go on the Canvas assignment, it's called Sources for March 2nd and 3rd. And you're going to the first one called US Media Polarization. US Media Polarization. Do you not have a Chromebook
No,
today?
yeah, not.
Yeah, go down to the library. Okay. We're gonna use it for the rest of class. JD, US Media Polarization. Yeah, we're just reading the first page. But just the first page, you can do it. It's interesting. Okay, how many of you are done reading that first page? Here's your hand. Okay, keep going for another minute. Okay, wherever you are, that is good enough. Why don't you head back to your seat? We are going to practice what we started last time about incorporating quotations. Let me test that back. Okay, 1 second. Oh, okay. All right, so at the top of this page, I have given you a research question. You, for your American Dream essays, you have your own research question. It's what you sort of formatted your thesis around. I've been giving you lots of feedback on that thesis statement, so you can keep revising it to try and get that perfect score. But just for today, this is going to be, we're going to pretend that this is our research question. This is what you're going to focus a little paragraph on. And it says, what is the most important effect media polarization will have on our country? So we're going to look at a number of different sources about this idea of bias in the media and what you think the one most important effect that is going to have on our country. This article, I think, starts to talk about that a little bit, this idea of like distrusting news sources and how the different parties distrust different news sources, and they don't have a whole lot of overlap, if any at all. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick a quotation from this article. I picked this one. I think it's really important that it's more Republicans voicing distrust, and that has been over the past 5 years. First, I am going to, well, I don't think we need this stuff. I am going to, instead of just quoting this in my paragraph that I want to write, I need to do that combination of paraphrasing with short quotations. Remember, we talked about how it's asking your reader a lot to stick in these big, long quotations. This is pretty straightforward language, but even this, I'd probably skip over if I were a reader reading your paper. So instead, you're going to try and put it in your own words with only a couple quotations in it, maybe. So I'm going to say something like, over the past, and in this case, it's now been 7 years, right? Because this came out. Over the past 7 years, Republicans have become more distrustful. I'm going to add distrustful about particular news sources. Something like that. So that really the only thing that I think is really important for my idea here is this idea of distrust. I could have focused on the growing partisan divide. I could have focused on the voicing part, that they're actually, maybe the distrust has always been there and they're just like saying it out loud now. But what I really want for my idea, because I'm trying to identify what I think is the biggest problem with polarization, is this idea of distrust. So I pull out that word in particular. Like I said, you could have, let's say, up to 5 words that you're quoting from in a row, but probably not much more than that. So just short little bursts of quotation. I could also fit that in other places, like it's not creating a partisan divide. Maybe I could say exacerbating a partisan divide, but I could add more quotations in that. You just really don't want to have like more than 5 words or so in a row that you are quoting. You can fit them into your sentence. So on this, what is this, goldenrod? On this goldenrod sheet, find one idea from the article you just read that could kind of speak to this main topic, and use that paraphrase quotation method in that box. Yes.
Quoting like a word at a time, how would you give credit to the author?
Yeah, I would do Jerkowitz. Is that really his name? That's a bummer. Jerkowitz. Yeah, so since these are both from the same source, I would do it like that at the end. Let's see, it's multiple authors though. Jerkowitz et al. Et al. Yeah, let's say there's multiple sources though, like just imagine, pretend there isn't, but let's say this came from one guy and this came from another. I would do Smith, semicolon, Jerkowitz. And then people know that the Smith came first and then the Jerkowitz, man. All right. Okay, try that in that first box then to try and find at least one thing to quote from this Pew Research article.
And so we have to do it. Do we have to do a quotation and then also paraphrase it, or just?
No, you only need to do this.
Wait, are we doing all of the articles?
No, just, well, we will get to as many as we can today, but for right now, you're just doing this one. Yeah. Yeah, basically you're writing one sentence with some quotes in it. That's an easier way of putting it, right?
Are we writing that?
Are we writing?
So you don't have to write this part.
But we're writing it. What
Are we doing?
You are finding that,
you
yeah,
writing
sorry, I was
yours?
confused. Not mine. You
Oh.
are finding a quotation from that Pew Research article where you can show me the paraphrase quote method that I just showed you.
Are we writing the whole?
And you don't have to write the quote, you just write the paraphrase with the little quote in it.
So it's not the whole article.
Just the one quote, yep. And you don't have to write that quote verbatim, you're just showing me this part. Yeah, sorry, that was confusing. Okay, when you are done writing that, pull up the second article on that Canvas page. It's called Why the Media Is So Polarized. Okay, full disclosure. This article comes from a very prominent, like really outspoken liberal guy named Ezra Klein. So when we're talking about bias in the media, we really should know that, right? Going into it, like what this perspective is coming from, where this perspective is coming from. Vox is a website that he started, so it also is like very tied to him. So keep what he says with a grain of salt. But the part that I want you to read, he's talking about a study. So I feel like this is a pretty good representation of that study. But you will notice some of that bias coming through. So scroll down. Everyone go to that now. You can go back to the Pew Research thing if you're not done with it. Open up Why the Media Is So Polarized. And scroll down to the little subheading that says reading the other side doesn't change our minds. Okay, and you only need to read that section before you get to the next subheading. This one's fascinating. This is the opposite of what you would expect. Often we say like, well, if you want to sort of discover your own bias, then read from a lot of different sources, but this actually says the opposite. So give it a read. Does anyone have any questions about where I am now? Okay, awesome. Yeah, okay, got it. So just this section, reading the other side doesn't change our minds. When you are done reading that section, you're going to do the same thing on the goldenrod sheet of paper where you find one quote that you can use for the paraphrase quote method. Paragraph that answers this question. After reading these two sources, what do you think is the sort of like real problem? Because I am going to say it's a problem. Maybe do I say effect? Okay, important effect. I guess it doesn't. We don't have to see it necessarily as a problem, but I want you to think what is the most important effect of the polarization of media, of the bias of media becoming kind of more and more transparent. I'm going to show you a little paragraph that I wrote to kind of show you how you can start to get the sources interacting. So when we're writing research papers like this, or we might say argument papers, researched arguments, let's call it that. When we're writing researched arguments, it's a really good idea to try to jump into a conversation rather than just finding sort of a source per paragraph. Sometimes when I'm reading student writing, it's like they'll have a point in their paragraph and their topic sentence will state that point. They'll find one source to back that up, and then that will be the whole paragraph, is just talking about that one source. But it can be really powerful to include multiple sources within one paragraph and to kind of show how they're related to each other. So this is mine. I say, as our interactions with the media become more polarized, our attitudes toward each other become more extremely divided. I need to revise this, but leading us to even more polarized news sources. So I'm kind of trying to talk about how it's a cycle. With Democrats reading from a number of sources and Republicans increasingly expressing distrust in those sources, the chance that Republicans and Democrats will ever find commonalities decreases. And that's from our friend Jerkowitz. In his article, Why the Media is Polarized, Ezra Klein argues that in this heightened political state, even when we view media from our political opponents, we develop a deeper certainty in the rightness of our cause. Kind of break my rule about 5 words in a row, but I felt like it fit there. Our consumption of media is, therefore, only furthering the differences between people. As we read from different media sources, we might be willing to hear other opinions, but we are less inclined to really listen. So what I'm trying to do here is show how these two sources, by talking about distrust and certainty, kind of have something to do with each other, and putting them together in my paragraph to show how they have these similarities in their topics. All right, so I want you to try to do the same. I want you to try to write a paragraph now that includes both the sources. And you can exactly copy what you wrote down on the front of the page if you want to, or you can choose different quotes to make it fit. But on the back of the goldenrod sheet, you're going to try and write a paragraph that uses 2 sources. Does anyone have any questions? Okay, let me know if you have questions. I'm back here.